Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1778 AN. Today's date is January 29th, 2019, and the title of the episode is Trump using the deep state central bank economic plan against them? Now, before I get started, I wanted to talk about Trump. You might have heard in the news that President Trump is withdrawing 2,000 of our boys and girls out of Syria. Just a while ago, he took an 11-hour flight in darkness and total secrecy to go out to Iraq with First Lady to visit the troops there. He said, "We're no longer the sucker, folks," was his storming declaration. With President Trump, you get what you see, and that's what we love about him. He delivers. So does Noble Gold. They put together this stunning solid silver coin to underline that great job he's doing, with highlights of his achievement to date and a portrait on the front. Any Trump supporter would be crazy about one of these. Go to TrumpCoin2020.com and use the code X22 to get free shipping. This is a $6.50 savings. Let's get into the economic collapse financial news. Now, before we had a change of the old guard to the new guard, that's what we're seeing right now. We're seeing the old guard, they're being removed. The new guard is coming in. And the new guard is not in sync with globalism, is not in sync with the central bank, is not in sync with what they had planned. Now the question is the new guard, and I'm talking about Trump and the Patriots, are they using the deep state central bank's plan against them right now? And I don't mean by manipulating the statistical numbers. I'm talking about using gold, using the de-dollarization, using sanctions, using everything we're seeing today to have nations move away from what? It's not a US dollar. It's a central bank note, which is the reserve currency of the world. We're going to be talking about that in just a minute. But let's talk about what's happening here in the US economy. Now, we see two things happening. The first thing we see happening is that the central bank illusion is starting to break apart, fall apart. And Trump is doing everything he possibly can to hold it off for a certain period of time. During this period of time, he's trying to bring back manufacturing, bring back jobs, create trade deals. Now, the first part, we see housing, retail, everything else that has to do with people. It is completely breaking down. And we can see with the housing market, well, those bubbles, they are deflating, and soon they're going to just pop and all the air is going to come out of it. Now, we're not just seeing this happen here in the United States. We're seeing it happen around the world. We're seeing it in Canada. We're seeing it in Australia. We're seeing it in Europe. Here in the United States, we see that home price growth, well, they are the weakest since January of 2015. Now, they expected a 5.02% October print, but it came in around 4.89%. And in November, it came in at 4.68%. As you can see, it's not going well. And we see there are some places where housing prices, they're still moving up, but very slowly. And we see other places where housing prices, they're starting to drop. Now, we're not going to see the entire country come down all at the same time. This didn't happen in 2008, didn't happen in the Great Depression. You see it happen in many different areas, and then it spreads, and then it hits every single area. And that's what we've been seeing here. Certain areas, and especially out of the 20 cities that Case-Shiller looks at, because those are the cities that the central bank used to prop this whole thing up. If you look outside of that, you can see that there are many, many places where prices are starting to fall. Now, the prices are still high. And what we're seeing is that everyday Americans who are earning their yearly salary, they cannot afford these types of homes. It's completely impossible. And something has to change. And that change is going to be a brand new economic system. Now, is it going to happen tomorrow? No. Trump, the Patriots, they've been planning for this. Now, Trump, he just secured another major trade victory. The European Commission approved U.S. soybeans to be used in the production of biofuels, a decision that will fulfill President Trump's demand that European Union buy more of the product. So today's decision is new proof that the European Union is delivering on our commitments. And it looks like Trump is getting his way. Remember, he also made a deal with China to accept the soybeans. So the EU right now currently imports around 14 million tons of soybeans annually for animal feed. The U.S. already holds a commanding share of the market. However, the Commission's decision to allow U.S. soybeans to be used in the making of biofuels, an agricultural-based energy alternative to fossil fuels, is expected to dramatically increase demand in Europe. So, once again, Trump is making these deals to better the United States moving forward. And why is he doing this? Well, we understand why he's doing this. Because we are headed towards a major transition in the economy. Now, Alistair McLeod, he put together 10 factors to look for in gold in 2019. And when I was reading this and looking at this, I started to think to myself, it seems like Trump is using the deep state, the central bank's plan, their economic plan, against them. Now, we need to back up a little bit so you can understand what I'm talking about here. When Obama was president, the plan back then, and if Clinton was in office, the plan back then was to move the entire central bank system from the United States to another country. Now, does that mean that country was going to be the reserve currency? No, I do believe they were going to try to make the SDR, maybe the reserve currency, maybe the yuan, maybe in combination, working together. We don't really know. They were going to use some type of paper currency that they can control. But we can see over time what the deep state, what the central bankers were doing. We knew they were moving all manufacturing, many businesses out of the United States. We knew with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, they were bringing the level of the United States down to the level of all the third world countries. China was receiving all the manufacturing businesses. Asia was receiving a lot of the businesses. Everything was being moved from one area to another. And the deep state, what they were doing is they were pushing sanctions on many countries. Now, countries have started to wake up and said, you know something? We're going to get out of the dollar. We're not going to use the dollar. And this way, the deep state won't have control over us. Now, think about what they were doing. They were moving away not from the U.S. dollar, but they were moving away from the central bank dollar. Certain nations were doing this. Today, we can see there's quite a bit of nations that are doing this. We see that China, Russia, India, and Iran, they are turning their backs on the dollar for trade settlement. Now remember, forget about thinking about the dollar as the people's dollar. This is a Federal Reserve note. It is a debt note. So they're turning their back on the central bank note. Moving forward, we don't want a central bank note. This is not good for the people. So back when Obama was president, they were hoping that Clinton was going to fill the presidency after Obama, and we were going to have an event. Now, there were certain countries that knew that this was happening. They knew they were getting prepared for the next system. And we see that China was a big part of this. And we know that the central banks, they were planning on China. They were going to be the next powerhouse. This is why Clinton was selling secrets. This is why we see all the technology moving to China. This is why they're in trouble today, because the deep state was involved in all of this. The central bankers were involved in all of this, preparing China to be the next powerhouse. And the power was going to be taken away from the United States. And of course, we're going to enter a war. And then, through the war, they were going to say everyone had a sacrifice. After the war, they were going to say, okay, the U.S. is completely damaged. Remember, China had the ability to bring down our jets. China had the ability, and they knew our secrets. So eventually what they were going to try to do is make America lose the war. And this way they can get rid of the Constitution. They can get rid of everything. Really think about it in those terms. But right now, everything has changed. Now, everything was in motion to have China as the powerhouse. Now, what has Trump been doing? Well, he's been setting up trade deals introducing tariffs against China, calling China out, having them look into what they've stolen technology-wise. Remember, each country has the deep state within the country. And we can see that Xi Jinping and Trump, they actually get along. And they are working on a trade deal. Remember, everything was weighted towards China. Now, Trump is trying to reset all of this and bring it back to the United States. But what we see happening here is that Russia and China, they have accumulated a lot of gold during this period because the central bankers were going to use the gold as a confidence builder, just like they did back in 1940. When we took the reserve currency away from England and we brought it over here to the United States, and gold was the confidence builder, but it was still a central bank system. The same thing is happening right now. Russia and China, they are getting rid of their dollar reserves and they're purchasing gold. Now, can they do this all at once? No, because it would crash the entire system. But we see that Russia and China, they've been dumping their dollar reserves and they've been purchasing gold. Russia in particular. China, a little bit harder to do. They can't dump everything all at once because it would completely crash the system. But we see other European countries like Hungary, Poland, they're accumulating gold reserves. We see a lot of countries repatriating their gold. Now, if you're going to destroy a central bank system, and remember, you just can't destroy the Federal Reserve. You need to destroy the entire system. Remember, Q has told us that gold will destroy the Federal Reserve. But gold will also destroy the IMF, the BIS, and all the central banks. Remember, in the beginning, Q gave us many different posts that had all the different countries with all the Rothschild central banks in these countries. If Trump uses the central bank plan and as all these countries start to remove their dollars to take on gold and continually do this over time, while Trump prepares this country for a transition, because eventually we have to come out and move away from the Federal Reserve note. We need to move into a people currency system where there's no interest attached. Now, to get the world to do this, what approach would you take? Would you continue with the plan of the central bankers? Up to a point. You would continue pushing these countries so they would move away from the dollar, move away from the central bank debt note, take on more gold. At a certain point, you wouldn't follow the central bank plan anymore. Go to war and then restart their system. At a certain point, the Patriot Plan comes into play. The Patriot Plan, in coordination with Russia and China and many other countries, would band together, use their gold to create a confidence builder and destroy the central bank system. Because once every country moves away from the central bank notes and uses their own national currencies. Now, going back a year or two, Russia has been calling all nations to use their own currencies in trade. Now, if countries start to do this and they use gold to maintain their wealth, they use their national currencies, what happens to the central banks? What happens to the central bank system? Well, they could use gold to make sure their countries are operational. They won't need the central bank printing press. They will not need to keep U.S. dollars in reserve, and that is really the Federal Reserve note, and they'll be able to sustain themselves. China, Russia, and many other countries would be able to do this. Other countries would struggle a little bit. China and Russia had been setting up the One Belt, One Road system for trade. So we can see that China and Russia, they've been making a lot of bilateral trade deals. Trump has been making a lot of bilateral trade deals. And in this way, gold would eventually destroy the Fed. Gold would eventually destroy the central banks in each one of these countries. And when I say central bank, I mean a private central bank, which is controlled by the Rothschild. Central bank, you can have one of those in your country as long as the people control it, like the Treasury, where you create your own currency. So if all these countries do this and they band together, there might be some outliers that don't want to go along with this. But if the main countries do this, we can see the central bank system completely implode. Now, what about all this debt? What about all this? Well, guess what? If the countries stick together, the gold, the value of the gold compared to the value of the paper and the debt, well, guess what? There'd be no problem there. Now, we can see how Trump, the Patriots, China, Russia, we could see how this could actually work, because we know from Q has been telling us that all these countries have the private Western Central Bank in their country, which is controlled by the Rothschild. We know there's going to be a restructuring. We know that gold is going to destroy the central bank. Well, if it's going to be done here, it has to be done everywhere. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.